G'day, I finally finished my first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 and truly loved it. In almost every aspect, it is an evolution of everything Larian has learned from Original Sin 1 and 2. It's also really good to see the studio praised so heavily given the circumstances of what they were facing leading up to the release of the first Original Sin. I'll leave a link for the little documentary about them in the description. But as much as I love the game, I also see some of its blatant flaws, and I do disagree pretty heavily with how the game has been portrayed by many people as this completely perfect and never before seen wonder. So, is this a 10 out of 10 masterpiece? No. Is it an amazing experience that pushes the RPG genre forward? Yes. Simply put, there are a huge amount of stories to experience, secrets to uncover, and opportunities to overcome your enemies that you'll almost feel overwhelmed by the choices Larian leaves up to you. There are things that I tended to forget about and would just be in awe that the option existed for me to exploit, like getting through locked doors. A lot of other games will give you a locked door and without a key or a lockpick, you're screwed. In Baldur's Gate, you can take a weapon to it. Found a door resistant to slash and piercing? Bring the cunt down with your fists because it's not resistant to bludgeoning. At one point I was inside a vault and couldn't get through a magically locked door and thought, surely I can't just use Gale here, right? So I brought him in, equipped him with the knock spell because I didn't have any knock scrolls on me at the time, and unlocked the door via magic. The game is constantly feeding you these opportunities to experiment and find your own way through problems, and that's part of the reason the ending feels so bad in comparison. It's kind of Larian's own Mass Effect 3 situation at the moment where all of your choices amount to a railroaded story that feels rushed and unfinished. Questions you think you should be able to ask are not available. Certain skills you maybe didn't want to utilize doesn't amount to meaning anything, and you barely get any lines from your comrades before the credits roll. As the savior of the city, you have a very brief conversation with your companions, which amounts to a couple of lines. Watch another character have their story cut short all of a sudden. The narrator says congrats, a character talks to the dead three and hits them with a GG easy, and then the credits roll. It is so underwhelming and lacking in closure that I have to wonder if this ending was rushed. Which brings me to one of the points people have made in defense of the game. Some people are under the impression that Larian just needs some time to fix things up, and maybe down the line they will release some sort of definitive edition like they've done with Original Sin 1 and 2. I think that's a very piss poor attitude given that the product that we have on our hands right now should be complete on release day in the first place. I'm not opposed to some sort of cleaner edition being released in future, but that's something that should be reserved for quality of life updates, not implementing the rest of the endings that many people potentially missed due to triggers being bugged out. It's such a glaring issue with the game that it's honestly disappointing to see so many outlets praise the fuck out of the game and only criticize it with vague things like Act 3 doesn't run as well. It runs better now, but fuck me, you'd think an unfinished ending that is as underwhelming and jarring as this one would garner more critique and kind of be important as to whether or not you rate the game as perfect. This game suffers from another all too familiar issue with games, and that's ludonarrative dissonance. The disconnect between the story being told and the story being experienced by the player in gameplay. Act 3 is where this comes into play pretty heavily because you're seemingly on a very strict time constraint to organize some loose ends, save a companion, and destroy the big baddie that's growing in power. Obviously, if this breaks your immersion, you would just beeline straight for the main quest and get it over with as quickly as possible, right? I would never recommend someone actually doing that because Act 3 is super dense with a plethora of interesting characters and a lot of fun situations to find yourself in. The reason I bring this up against the game is because it highlights Larian's weakness with writing final acts. It's something that was criticized in the 2 Original Sin games, and it's pretty blatant here too. It's a real shame because the writing is excellent all the way up to this point, so long as we disregard a couple of, I guess, plot holes would be the best term to use, such as not being able to question a certain character about their relationship and history with a pretty important NPC, which is something we can learn about fairly early on in Act 2. Something I had happen to me in Act 2 was a pretty important story moment that was happening, and I wanted to side with a certain person or persons. I'm trying to be somewhat vague so it's not completely spoilery, and I was clicking the person to initiate the conversation and nothing was happening. I had to have a conversation with this particular character just not be present at all during the cutscene. I did my thing, and then after everything had unfolded, they then just suddenly rocked up and said, "Oh, okay, so you're working against me." And I thought, well, fuck. I was trying to work with you, but the game was just bugged out. It wouldn't let me progress. And I don't know when a fix came in for that particular issue, but I tried rebooting the game, tried going back a couple of saves, and just getting stuck at this same point. And then in a playthrough with my sister, we very recently got to that same part, and we didn't even have to interact with the character. We just walked near them, and this whole cutscene played, and I said to her, fuck, this really sucks, because I was playing the Dark Urge, going for a bit of a evil playthrough, and this entire sequence did not exist for me. I had all these options just sort of removed. And plenty of other people are talking about the same issue happening in Act 3, where they can't even complete some of these companion quest lines because they're just bugged out. Another aspect I want to touch on is the marketing for the game regarding not releasing with microtransactions. I am fully aware of a lot of AAA companies taking the piss more and more each year when it comes to their business models and the fact that they release half-broken games whilst asking for ongoing monetary support for these half-broken games. The narrative that surrounded Baldur's Gate 3 would have you believe this was the first game to release in decades without microtransactions. It is great that Larian doesn't want to touch that business practice, but I think the support around it has made people sound like boomers who would say stuff like, "Oh, why don't they play real music on the radio instead of auto-tuned rap?" I hate scummy business practices too, but any potential criticism almost seems to have been thrown out the window to make room for declarations that Larian has single-handedly saved the industry. I love the studio too, but simmer down a little, eh? There are countless other games that release without any DLC or extra items to buy inside an in-game shop. You'd think AAA releases were the only things the gaming industry sees. Look, overall, I'd put this game into my top 10 for sure, because it is a beautiful game in almost every aspect. Acting is fucking on point. It is insane just how much great acting there is across the board. The worst acting in the game is still really, really good acting. And that to me is wild, because the amount of characters that you can talk to that have lines is just immense. And for your worst actor in the game to be a really good actor, that is a huge accomplishment. And I couldn't even tell you which of those characters had only good acting versus great acting, because all of it was just really good. And extra props to the companions as well. I don't think I could name one in particular that stood out more than the others. All of them were just fucking excellent. Level design is great. The way they use verticality is so fucking good. All the environments look incredible. The art style and the graphics look gorgeous. Having these close-up cinematic cutscenes for all the conversations just really lends itself to the brilliant acting. Sound design is excellent, and of course the music, oh my god. Borislav has really outdone himself here, which was super exciting for me because Original Sin 2 is one of my most favorite soundtracks of all time. And the Baldur's Gate 3 soundtrack is just fucking incredible. I really do welcome some sort of definitive edition to tidy things up, bring us quality of life features for UI and such, but I will hold true to the fact that the game should have been criticized a lot more and definitely shouldn't be rated higher than a 9 out of 10 for bugs and performance issues alone. Hi-Fi Rush is still my personal game of the year at the moment because I don't think a single thing was out of place or bad in that game. Let me know your thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3 and how you've been liking it, and until the next video, have a good one.